Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this OPP Ask Me Anything session. And I know often we have people joining us from all over the country or potentially all over the world. So wherever you're joining us from today, it's great to have you here. My name is Marisol, and I'm joined today by my colleague, Constable Real Levac. And hopefully, we'll be able to answer a lot of your recruiting related or OPP related questions today. We're in January, it's a new year, so maybe you've set some career goals for yourself as well. So, this is a great opportunity maybe for you to start working towards those policing career goals. So we'll start out just by introducing ourselves and then get into some of your questions, because often we get some great questions here. So just to tell you a bit about myself, I've been with the OPP now for 20 years, and I started out the way everyone does, doing frontline general patrol duties. I worked in the Petawawa area and the Renfrew areas, working the road. And then I specialized as a crisis negotiator. I was a member of the provincial liaison team, where we dealt with a lot of protest events and large scale events. I was also a member of the peer support team that supports all of our frontline members, our civilian members, our volunteers, all of their family members, and our retirees. And now I'm in uniform recruitment, which is what brings me to this moment today. So that's just a little bit about myself.
So I'm Real Levac. I spent a good chunk of my career in frontline policing as well. I've done a lot of the different jobs basically that you can in detachment. I rode the motorcycle for a number of years. I was breathalyzer technician, community safety officer, media liaison officer, court officer, a lot of the different roles within your own detachment that you can have. I also did learning opportunities in the communications center, on the road as a sergeant, in recruitment as well. I've been with the OPP now for over 26 years, and I've been in recruitment for almost 8 now. It's been really good with a lot of different experiences, and that's what's kind of fun about this job, is that a lot of doors are open to you throughout your career. Aussi, je veux dire que je parle en français. S'il y a des questions aujourd'hui en français, laissez-moi savoir. Vous pouvez l'écrire en français, je vais vous répondre aussi. Et puis, je vais vous aider le mieux que possible. So I just want to touch base on a couple things as people are saying hi, and once we start getting questions here. Preferred postings. So detachment posting selections, there's a form sent out if you are invited to interview for you to select 6 preferred postings. So first off, I want to say that 87% of candidates get one of their 6 preferred postings. We try really hard to give you one of those. And basically, if we can keep you somewhere where you want to be, it works best for you, for your family, and us for an organization that if you're happy to be in a location that you are. The other 13%, we do have needs for the organization, so operational needs. Sometimes certain detachments will require recruits to be offered a position in those places. Often we see that up north. There's a lot of turnaround, and not everybody wants to go in all the different locations that we have across the province. So sometimes you will get offered a position elsewhere, and it'll be up to you to decide whether you accept that offer or not with that detachment. But please make an educated choice of where you'd like to go. So like I said, 87% of candidates do get one of their 6, so make sure it's somewhere you really want to go, because once you get there, if it's a non-duration detachment, you're not transferring, you're not going to do any type of lateral transfer, apply to any other position for a minimum of 3 years. After that, doors can start opening in those regards, but not before then. So make sure it's somewhere that you want to go.
Okay, so we're starting to get a few questions here. So let's just see what we've got. So someone was asking, if you're unsuccessful at the interview, what would be the next step, or what should you do? So first of all, it's an accomplishment just to make it to the interview stage. So you should recognize yourself for that. But then after the interview, of course, it's always difficult to get that news that you weren't successful. But that's really an opportunity for you to step back then and self-reflect on what areas you felt maybe there are opportunities for you to improve and develop yourself. So what I tell people is to attend things like this Ask Me Anything session for sure, but other things like our information sessions can be hugely helpful. We have live and virtual sessions, but we also have recorded sessions on Facebook and social media where we go through all of the areas of assessment, and there are 10 areas of assessment, and we really break those down. And so often in the process of that, you might become aware of some areas where perhaps you weren't quite as ready or as competitive as you thought you were. And so then you have a year or more, however long it takes for you to develop yourself in those areas, so that when you reapply, it's really clear to us that you have been motivated and made those efforts to self-reflect and then develop. If you reapply and essentially haven't changed anything, then chances are you'll get the same results the second time around.
And that'll go as well for people starting off looking at getting ready for this process. For those that are new to the process, all that information is important for you to prepare yourself and be competitive. So not just those unsuccessful. And I'm bringing that up because there is a question regarding trying to get the information. So those information sessions are a huge way to prepare yourself. So somebody's asking, how long does it take the pre-screening process from shuttle run to a PBQ or LFI interview or invite? There's no specific time. I would say weeks, not months. We do have 3 intakes a year that we're trying to fill, so we're not waiting very much in between different stages as best that we can. So it's important to have all your documents ready for you to be prepared to run through the process. And at some stages here and there, you just have to be patient. I know everybody's kind of biting at the bit. They want to get through the process and they want to hopefully get through to the end. But sometimes there's a few lags here and there. You just have to be patient. We will get back to you. At any stage in the process, if you're not successful, we do get back to candidates. We don't just let things drop and just stop communication. You either receive information that you're going to continue to the next stage, or you will get notification that you're no longer in the process. So sometimes it's just a little bit of patience, and I would just say weeks and not months between a lot of these different areas, depending to when you apply, when the next class is, but you won't be sitting there for months on end.
We have a question about the shuttle run and recording yourself doing the shuttle run. So if you've applied to the OPP, one of the first steps once we receive your application is you will receive very detailed instructions about the shuttle run. And that email will give you a link to a video that you can watch that gives you very clear instructions. So when it comes to that, follow the instructions in detail, show us your very best. So level 7 is the minimum required to pass. However, if you can do more than level 7, don't stop, show us that. Right now on social media, if you look at Facebook or on our YouTube, we have a video there that's about 12 minutes long that goes into a lot of detail in terms of how to record it, what we want to see, where to get the audio, which you can download from our website, opp.careers. And so that video will go into a lot of detail, more than I can go into now, in terms of how to measure it out and what we need to see.
Okay. So somebody's asking, here's an interesting question, because we do have special skills or transferable skills. Language skills is one of those that is a huge asset because of the wide population in the province. There's people that speak, I can't say every language in Ontario, but there's a lot of different languages in Ontario. So having any specific language skills outside of English that you can bring is an enhancement to your file. But somebody's asking if the OPP offers second language courses to officers if hired. We do not offer those. You're more than welcome to take them on your own, but but those are taken on your own at your own expense if you choose to take any type of communication skills after you're hired, anytime before as well.
Oh, I'm just scrolling through these here.
I can jump on one quickly
Sure.
here, Marisol.
Sure.
So we're asking what kind of civilian careers are available with the OPP. So I can touch on a couple, and generally OPP civilian positions will be on the Ontario Go Job site. But we do have positions in communication centers across the province. There are 4 communications. There's Aurelia, London, North Bay, and Thunder Bay. We have data entry clerks with the OPP. We have offender transportation unit and special constables that do security at Queen's Park and at GHQ in Aurelia. And those special constables are uniform positions as well. So they're a good stepping stone for those that would potentially like to get into uniform recruitment as a constable. Sometimes if you're not quite ready, you can explore these different avenues. But for most of the civilian positions, the Ontario Go Job site is where you're going to find those links and those opportunities.
And there was a question in terms of when you should apply if you hope to be considered for a particular intake. And so we have 3 intakes per year, generally December, April, and September. And we can't really give you a sense of when your application would be processed and how long, if you're successful, how long that whole process will take. So you can't really apply with a particular class or intake in mind. So that's the best answer I can give you, is apply when you feel competitive and when you know you would be in a position to accept an offer of employment if you got to that point, and that you would be ready to start your training.
Okay. So here's a quick one. Vision requirements. Does uncorrected visual acuity mean without glasses? Yes. Corrected is with lenses, and uncorrected is without any assistance whatsoever. So there are certain requirements for corrected and uncorrected. You can find those through our frequently asked questions on our website. There's a link to the medical assessment there for vision and other things that we look for, vision, hearing, and medical as well. So if you have any concerns that way, through our frequently asked questions, there's a link to that on our website, which is opp.ca/careers. I'm going to put that plug in there.
And we've got a question about when you're applying, in terms of scanning your documents and submitting them, what needs to be in there and in what format. So we provide very clear instructions about that, again, on the website that my colleague Rael just listed. So what I suggest is that you take the time to follow those instructions. We give very clear instructions in terms of what format we want them to appear, in what order they should appear, and everything that we expect to see in the application package. There's a checklist at the very end so that you're sure you don't forget anything, and then submit those online to OPP Hire. So please do go on our website and follow the instructions. They're very clear.
So somebody's asking if they were unsuccessful in an application recently with another police service. They have to wait a year for that service, but do they have to wait to apply to the OPP? So the easy question, the short answer question is no, you do not have to wait to apply. You can apply to the OPP. The longer answer is for you to assess your application with that other police service and where you feel you might need to make yourself more competitive to be considered for a constable position, because depending why you were not successful, and I know some police services don't offer explanations as to why. It's up to you to self-assess your portfolio, your application, and depending how far in the process you went, that might give you better indication or not. But it's to make sure that if you're not successful recently at one service, make sure that you do everything that you can to increase competitiveness in areas you feel that you're lacking. Okay, if one police service says that you weren't, for whatever reason, you weren't successful in their process, it doesn't necessarily mean that you'll automatically be unsuccessful in ours, but it should be telling you something, that there's something there that's missing or lacking, that you might need to address. So if you can identify that and not put in an application with the OPP too hastily, that might benefit you as well. The other thing too is that if you put in too quick and you're not successful with the OPP, then yes, you have to wait another year to reapply to the OPP. So sometimes it's important, and it might be a good way of taking just a few months to work on some things, and then ideally you can reapply and be successful. You only have so much control, but if you can identify things and work on those, then that'll be a huge asset, and it'll show that drive and determination and that ability for you to kind of problem solve and figure things out and work on those issues.
And we have a question here in terms of what is important to think about when considering a career in policing. And that's a good question, and something anyone who's applying or thinking of applying should ask themselves. But it's a tough question too, because it's going to be different for everyone. So some considerations are for your own family, and whether the career of policing is something that will be conducive to your own family life, as well. You'll really, the best answer to that is to learn as much about the career as possible. So doing things like this Ask Me Anything session, attending information sessions, speaking to officers, because what you get from TV and movies is really not necessarily a reflection of what policing is really like, Hollywood policing versus real policing. So it's important to learn the things about policing in terms of how much paperwork there is. And in the OPP, we do a lot of our own investigations. How much driving is involved in policing. That's something you have to be comfortable with. Interacting with different populations and people who are struggling in life, and being able to support them and de-escalate situations. So it's a really challenging career, but it's also a rewarding career. But the best thing to do is to do your research, because you know yourself the best. So at the end, your family the best. So at the end of the day, the more you've armed yourself with knowledge, the better you'll be able to make that decision for yourself. I don't know, Constable Levac, whether you have any other insights on that.
No, you actually put that pretty good. I was just thinking of my next answer here. So somebody's asking if we cross-reference to past applications when they reapply to the OPP. Absolutely. So that what I was explaining a while ago with the other police services about improving yourself, well, we look for that. That year is to improve yourself, identify what you were lacking, because I've spoken to candidates in the past where they had an opportunity and got interviewed and they were not successful. And then later they reapply and they were not offered an interview the second time. And they wonder why if they got one the first time. So that's where that cross-reference comes in. We want to see what you've done different. What different things do you have to offer? What development have you done since your first application? We want to see that work come in. So it could be employment, it could be education, it could be your fitness, it could be any of the areas of assessment. Okay, but yes, we do compare to see that you've put in the work and the preparation and the development to make yourself more competitive. Because if you're not successful the first time, it doesn't mean that you can't be successful. It just means that there's areas of assessment that need to be addressed and developed. So yes, we do cross-reference, and not only your current application will be looked at. It all gets looked at as a whole package.
And there's a question around employment, and if you were terminated from a job or fired from a job, does that affect your application? And so, of course, with your application, we want a very detailed employment history. So we essentially, on the application form, you'll see we ask you to list every job you've basically had from the first job you had in high school right up until the present, even if they were short-term, occasional jobs. We want to know all of it. And on the application, we ask you what was your reason for leaving? And yes, so if you were fired or terminated from a job, we do want to know that. And those are discussions that we'll have with you. and discuss what the termination was, what the reasons for termination were. It's not necessarily a deal breaker. It really depends what the circumstances were. But what I will say is that honesty and transparency is more important than anything. If we find at any stage in the process that someone perhaps lied or they're withholding information because they hope we won't find it because maybe it's not the most positive information, that will be a real issue if we find out that there's any concerns around integrity. So honesty is really, really important. We want to know what you've learned from mistakes you've made in the past, how you've moved on, how you've grown, and those are discussions that we can have.
So somebody's asking how important are volunteer hours were beginning in the application process. So we do look at that. It is one of our areas of assessment. One of the answers I get often is that people say they want to be a police officer because they want to help the community. They want to be part of the community, help the community. And that's wonderful because that's what we do. But we also like to see that you have that commitment prior to policing. So that's where the volunteer hours come in. We look for an average and just a ballpark average, 1 to 3 hours a week. Okay. We like to see that consistent giving back to the community, not just, oh, I worked a one Saturday, so I'm good now. Okay. We like to see that regular commitment that it's part of your lifestyle to give back to the community one way or the other. It doesn't necessarily have to be all police related. Anything that you're giving of your time without any compensation back, that's community service. You're helping others. That's what we're looking for. Okay. So it is very important. It is one of our areas of assessment that we look at. So please look into getting some done. And we do understand that sometimes it's a little bit harder than some places are more difficult to get hours than others. The COVID thing is not as much of a factor now than it once was. Most places are up and running. So there's usually something to be found at some point. And I always tell people something is better than nothing on your application. But we like to see that long-term commitment rather than just 2 weeks before your application, you decided to join some type of volunteer. I would rather see that than nothing at all. But I'd like to see something long-term that you've been doing this for a while. And something outside of your required 40 hours of high school community service. Okay. That's not as much of a factor because by the time we see candidates, they've been out of high school for a period of time. But nonetheless, we like to see beyond those mandatory hours because you don't have a choice of those. We want to see it's actually volunteering coming from you.
Question around fitness workouts and what would be considered a positive asset when it comes to fitness. And someone's mentioning here that they do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So certainly when you apply to the OPP, you'll see that we require 2 weeks worth of fitness logs with your application. And then we require weekly fitness logs every week thereafter, either until you're successful or you're unsuccessful and you're told to stop. So it could be weeks or months worth of fitness logs. So we want to see everything you're doing, all of those extra workouts, whether it's jujitsu, playing hockey, soccer, whatever that may be. But then just to touch on it very briefly here, there are certain things that we definitely need to see on your fitness logs. We want to see on a weekly basis that you're running several times a week. So consistently, I like to see that you're running about 3 times a week outdoors, and longer distances as well, because we do some long distance runs as part of our physical training. So anywhere between 2.4 kilometers to 5 kilometers and more is what we want to see. We want to see you testing yourself on the shuttle run a couple times a month to make sure that you're at least reaching level 7, but hopefully exceeding that. We want to see you testing yourself on the Ontario Fitness Pin once a week, all 4 components on the same day. Again, you need to achieve at least 75% as your minimum score. And then we want to see that you're strength training consistently at least 3 times a week. So there are certain things that we really want to and need to see in order to assess you and compare you fairly to other candidates. And then all of that other stuff you're doing in terms of physical activity and stress management are other things that we consider as well. So the fitness we could go on and on about for hours. And if you watch our information sessions, we do touch on fitness as one of the areas of assessment in quite a lot of detail.
And on that note, stay tuned. Marisol and I are filming a video next week on how to properly score yourself at home on the flexibility, and give you some heads up as well on how to set yourself up to do the core endurance. So we're going to do that filming, and we'll get that out to you through social media in the very near future. Now, I just wanted to, for those that are starting in the process and new to all this, and based on the questions I'm getting from Rohit, I just want to say the best place to start if you have a lot of general questions is to attend an information session. It will describe, and I think it's been touched on today already a little bit, but it'll describe the requirements, the things that we're looking for within the areas of assessment. Okay. A lot of these questions today, which are wonderful questions, are often geared specifically to certain elements of the process. And if you're not familiar with the process is, sometimes it's hard to understand where these questions are coming from. So if you're just beginning an information session, follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. We have videos on YouTube. We have our website, which I mentioned earlier, opp.ca/careers. There are frequently asked questions on their website. So those are great resources to start. And then as your questions develop and get a little bit more specific and difficult or tricky or very individual, these Ask Me Anything sessions will kind of pinpoint those very specific questions. We want to try to get as many of those as we can. As this is not an information session, we just kind of try to have different elements for everybody out there at different stages within the process and knowledge of the process. So Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, our website, frequently asked questions. Have a look at all that. Our information sessions are posted on our website. You can register to them from there. There's not usually a cost. It's more necessarily for controlling numbers and knowing who's coming. So please have a look at all those, and we'll continue with questions.
So there's a question about kind of general, what do we enjoy most about working the front line and and that experience despite, the challenges. So I can only speak for myself and what I enjoyed. There were a lot of things I enjoyed. And I think this is one thing that draws a lot of people to the profession is the fact that every day is different. There may be similarities. You're going to collisions, you're going to different calls, but the people that you interact with every day are different. The situations are slightly different. So that was kind of what I enjoyed in terms of that daily variety and not knowing what was going to come in and when, and the learning curve. The learning curve for the first few years as a new recruit working the front line, it can be stressful because there's so much to absorb, and to translate that from what you've learned in theory in class and then take it out into the real world, that can be stressful because you're often presented with something, you're in uniform, people are looking at you to be an expert, and you're still learning. But I found that to be really exciting. So that's another thing I really enjoyed about the job. There's so many things, and just the different opportunities we get to try different experiences. And once you decide kind of what your areas of interest are and where you excel, then being able to specialize like I was able to as a crisis negotiator, that's a lot of fun. I took a lot from that.
All right, somebody's got a good question here. If you provide an OACP certificate, will the testing, vision, hearing, and Sigma be transferable to the OPP process? So yes. So first off, I want to say that the OACP certificate is not required to apply to the OPP. Some police services require it. We do not. But if you do have it, absolutely put it in. So for the Sigma test is only valid for 12 months. After that, you would have to redo it. The vision and hearing will be valid, and we can use those scores as long as your certificate is still valid itself. So we won't make you redo the vision and hearing if you get to that point, which is in the background stage of our process. If you have it within your ACP certificate, yes, we will accept that.
Good question here in terms of what do we know now as recruiters and officers that we wish we knew during our own hiring process that would be good information for anyone out there now who is thinking of applying. And I know it was different when I applied and probably when Constable Levac applied, over 20 years ago. We didn't have great platforms like this where it was so easy to access and acquire information. We're not dinosaurs, but social media wasn't really a thing back then. And so if you wanted to learn something, you had to go to those few in-person sessions, those information sessions at detachments. And now you have so much information available to you. You really would be remiss if you weren't using all of those opportunities to educate yourself on the process and the organization. So you being here today, that's great. I would say attention to detail and following instructions is a really big one. From the very beginning, when you first submit your application to us, that's the first impression that we get of candidates. And often we'll see that maybe the care and attention that should have been given to their application is missing. So I would say at every stage of the process, put your best foot forward. Remember, this is a competitive process. And so we're not just considering you in a bubble on your own. We're considering you compared to all of the other candidates and applicants because we select the best. So that's maybe a long answer to the question, but hopefully it helps.
So somebody's asking, after you submit your shuttle run video, what would determine whether a person moves on to the LFI? So when you submit your application, I'm just going to back up a little bit. When you submit your application, you get a file number. And then shortly thereafter, you will get a request to submit your shuttle run video. You have 2 weeks to do so. Once submitted, we take your shuttle run video, as long as it meets standard, and your application, and we review it. We call it the pre-screening stage. And this is where we compare, or not necessarily compare, but we look at the areas of assessment and how competitive you are in those areas of assessment. That will decide whether we feel you're competitive enough to be offered and invited to come to an interview. If we feel there's too many places or things lacking within the areas of assessment, that's when you get the decline letter, and then you have to wait a year to reapply. So it's your whole application that we look at. We don't look at just one area or the other. We look at the whole totality of your application. But the process is very competitive. You're competing against many, many, many other candidates that do the best they can. The successful candidates that we offer employment and that come work for us, they try to nail every area of assessment in there. Sometimes people say, I can't do certain things because I don't have time, or there's this, there's that. The ones that are successful through the process find a way to get through it and get his best. I'm not saying they're perfect. There are no perfect candidates. We're not looking for perfect candidates, but those successful candidates rate really high on those areas of assessment and are able to meet the needs that we have. So it's the pre-screening. That's the initial thing that we look at with your past shuttle run. And as we get further in the process, we just get deeper and deeper within your past experiences and knowledge and into your background after the interview if you're successful there. And we just keep deeper and deeper into who you are to see if you would be a successful candidate with us.
Question around night shifts and what is that like? And is it something that gets harder as you age? And honestly, that depends on the person. To be honest, because it's a good question, because you will be working shift work. I found it a struggle because I'm not someone who sleeps well during the day. I don't even sleep that well at night. So it was a struggle for me, to be honest. Now in recruiting, I work more of a straight day schedule. So it really, the answer to that is it depends on the person. For people who have children, and if you're trying to sleep during the day and your kids are home and the family is doing their thing and it's noisy, that can be really disruptive. So really, as a shift worker, although it's always a changing schedule, we're sleeping days, sleeping nights, as much as possible within that changing schedule, having some kind of routine is really important. So a routine around fitness and a routine around nutrition and eating at the right times, working out at the right times becomes really important. But it really comes down to the type of person you are. And, some people are lucky enough that they can sleep during the day and sleep good 8 hours and they wake up refreshed. So if you're that person, you're lucky.
Okay. Somebody's asking if family members' problems with the law can that reflect negatively on you. Yes and no. So depending what it is, who in your family and what kind of association you have with those family members. That old adage that you can't pick your family, but you pick your friends, falls back on how much time you're spending with these people, and depending as well on the severity of those problems with the law, or the depth of their, let's say, criminal activity, if it falls into that extent. If they just had something fairly minor and they've moved on, they learned from it, it was some time ago, it may not be an issue. And I'm talking a little bit vague because it's a case by case issue, depending who it is, what the incident was, how long ago it was, how close you are to that person. There's a lot of different factors that come into play. So that's why I can't give you a very solid yes or no answer. A lot of it will depend on who it is. But it's making choices on your communication with them, and depending what it is, if it's a lifestyle thing that they have on the criminal side of things, then you would drastically have to limit your association with them to show that that's not part of your lifestyle. But yes, it could be a negative effect on your application, but depending on some of the choices and circumstances surrounding those family members, it may not as well. So I hope I can kind of answer that. I know I'm vague on it, but there is no black or white, yes or no answer.
If you're strong in most of the areas of assessment, but still weak in another, should you still apply? We kind of touched on this a little earlier, in the sense that if you're unsuccessful at any stage of the process with us, and if you're declined, then you have to wait at least a year to reapply. So I recommend that you only apply when you, in your heart of hearts, feel like you are at your competitive best and you've done everything to develop yourself. We see a lot of applications in a week, and so the ones that are strong and the ones that are weak really stand out to us. So we've become quite good at looking at those and seeing where someone hasn't made an effort. So is it possible that because you lack in a certain area of assessment that you might be screened out? It's possible. I can't say for sure. I would say apply when you feel really confident.
So the areas of assessment have just been posted up, and have a look at them. If you go on our website and download our application, there's no commitment to downloading it. There's a self-assessment tool, which is one of the documents there, and it has the areas of assessment. And part of that application is that you assess yourself. Okay, you go in, you rate yourself, and then you put a brief description on why you rate yourself. Basically, show your accomplishments on why you're giving yourself it's a 1 to 5 scale that you do there. So that's, you can see them there, and you do have to look at them and rate them yourself for us to give. It gives us an understanding of who you are and how you see yourself, which is a good piece from there.
And with respect to the areas of assessment where sometimes I notice weaknesses, and I think of it more as a missed opportunity. And I think Constable Levac mentioned it earlier. fitness is sometimes an area where people are struggling, but another one is in community service. And I refer to community service as an opportunity for you because quite often through your community service, depending on what you choose, you might be able to increase you might be able to improve yourself in another area of assessment. So perhaps through your community service, you gain some leadership experience. So maybe you're coaching, or maybe you're doing some kind of volunteer experience where you're mentoring someone, or maybe you acquire communication skills because you're volunteering for a distress line, and so you learn about crisis de-escalation and grief and interacting with people with mental illness. So it can it can really give you some opportunities to develop yourself in other areas. It's not just about getting those volunteer hours because the OPP wants me to, so I'm just going to do anything at all just to get it done with. Really be mindful about what your choice is. And we're not asking you to make it a part-time job. Honestly, we know everyone's really busy with life, so it might be a matter of just a few hours a week.
Somebody's saying if they forget to answer certain things they've been involved in with the police at interview, if that can affect their application. So depending what it is, yes. Before an interview, I always tell people, and Constable Primo mentioned it about honesty and integrity. At any point, if we find out anything about you, particularly something negative at any point in the process where you had a chance to disclose that information and you have not, that may affect your application. Now, in saying that, and that's particularly like negative things. If it's something positive, if you called to report a drunk driver and you forgot to mention that in your interview, I'm not overly concerned that you might have forgotten that. Okay. But if you were involved in a complaint and you were the actual person driving and had been drinking and you failed to disclose that, then I would be more concerned over that. So we'd like to know if you've ever reported things. You should have an idea instead of saying that you have reported certain incidents in the past. Maybe you're a witness for a collision or something like that. You may not remember the exact dates and the exact details, but you should remember at some point if you've ever had contact with police one way or the other. Okay. So we can assess accordingly for that, but particularly on that question, it's the negative things. If you don't disclose things that you feel we need to know and we find out on our own, we start doubting that honesty and integrity piece, whether you're trying to hide it from us or you're truly not remembering. There's ways for us to try to get that as we speak in an interview. So make sure you're upfront with everything at any point in the application process.
In terms of age for people when they're applying, we don't have an age preference. The minimum requirement is that you be 18 years of age. There's no maximum where there's a cutoff. And in fact, if you're interested, one of our recruiters has a podcast called Reflections Inside the OPP. And just recently, he interviewed a new recruit. She's 52 years old and has started her career with the OPP. So that might be something you'd find interesting to listen to.
All right. So I'm going to hit with one more here, or maybe another one. We'll see. There's only one up on the board here. How can we prepare for the interview portion of the OPP? So I have another colleague of mine would say that the smartest person in the room during the interview is the candidate, because our local focus interview is about their questions about you. So know yourself, know your portfolio, any incidents that you feel you might bring to the table to describe certain things that you've been involved in, know the details. Okay. Know your grades, know when you got tickets, when you've been involved in collisions, details of those. You should be like an open book. I should be able to ask you anything and you have the information to provide. It's when I see candidates and for them to answer a question, they have to start thinking about, well, let's see, I was dating so-and-so. I think I was in second year university heading to this place. So I think it was in and around that time. You should be able to tell me exactly what happened without having all those different little stories to try to wrap your head around what was going on at that time. Okay. Know your documentation, know your application inside and out, and all the documents that you have. Certain things I may not be too worried about the exact date, month, year to the moment, but you should have an idea if it was winter 2018 or some time ago. Okay. So I can balance and have some be reasonable in some of that information, but at the end of the day, know your application inside and out and be prepared to answer that. When I was preparing, I used to work at corrections. I'd be up in the towers. I had written down a whole bunch of questions that I thought could possibly be asked. And I used to answer those questions out loud to myself in the tower. Another place to do it is in front of a mirror or in front of your peers. You'd be surprised how awkward it feels to answer that way to your peers or even to yourself in front of a mirror. But it helps verbalizing your answers rather than knowing it in your head and studying it on a piece of paper. It's always a little bit different to verbalize it. And this way, if you're confident in your answer, it shows that self-confidence. That's another way you can prepare and hopefully be successful.
I was scrolling down to some of the older questions that maybe we missed. So someone was asking to get into different areas of the OPP, how much time does that take? So really, it goes back to what I was saying earlier. The first few years of your career as a new recruit, there is a huge learning curve, and you're kind of like a sponge taking it all in. And so I would say at least for the first 3 years, you're just learning the fundamentals of how to be a competent and solid police officer and feel like you could handle most situations that are thrown at you. So I would say at least the first 3 years, but typically more like 5 years before someone might look at applying to a specialty unit. That in itself is very competitive. But there are some additional or extra duties at detachment that people can take on once they've acquired some skills and special interests, where they're extra duties on top of working as a frontline officer. So that might be within 3 to 5 years, depending on your learning and your development.
Okay. So one last question. I think this one is a good one here, and it's important. They're asking about opinions on alcohol and cannabis use recreationally, okay, not in the form of abuse. So we look at that, both alcohol and cannabis, on your general use, on your respect for the alcohol, how often you might have alcohol. And in the OPP, we have to be what we call fit for duty. You have to make sure that you show up to work not under any effects of any type of substances. And that could be alcohol, it could be cannabis, any medication you're on, that you're in a position that you can properly come to work and do your job. And we can verify some of that too on your use of these substances throughout the process. We ask you about it. We can talk to your references about it. Do you have history of coming to work in your current employer with any issues with alcohol or any substance use or anything like that? So we like to see basically your use of it in your life. You have respect of it, that you're not using as a stress management tool, because by far it is not a stress management tool. So we just look at that overall use that you have towards any type of those medications, alcohol, cannabis of the sorts. So
go ahead.
I was just going to wrap up unless you had something, Marisol.
No, absolutely.
Okay. So that's it for today. We have to go. I thank you for all the great questions. Again, repetitive, but I think it's important. Please look at our website, opp.ca/careers. You have a lot of information on the hiring process there. There's also a link to our frequently asked questions. There's also a link to the fitness logs, to the shuttle run video. Please make sure you use the Leger shuttle run video, or audio, I should say, so that you're using the right one with the right cadence. We are on social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube. We have other weekly Ask Me Anything sessions. We are out there. Prepare yourself properly, and good luck to everybody, and hope to see you at an interview or on the road someday. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, everyone.